My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 42 years old, and I learned what my family really thought of me standing outside my own father's funeral. The church doors were locked. My brother had changed the guest list. My mother stood inside pretending she didn't see me. And while they buried the man I spent 8 years caring for, they told everyone I had abandoned him. 3 days later, a lawyer opened a brown envelope my father hid for 12 years. Inside was a letter that destroyed every lie they had told. And the worst part? The money wasn't what broke them. The truth did.
My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 38 years old, and I learned exactly what my family thought I was worth while sitting in an airport security office with a crying 6-year-old and a canceled passport. 3 hours earlier, I had been packing for the first real vacation I'd taken in 11 years. 3 hours later, I was watching a TSA supervisor explain why my daughter's passport had been reported lost and replaced the day before our flight. Except I never reported it lost, and neither did my daughter. Someone else had. My mother. The same mother I'd been quietly supporting for nearly a decade. The same mother who would later tell everyone it was just a misunderstanding. What I discovered that afternoon cost my family a house, 2 inheritances, and every lie they'd spent 15 years building. But that wasn't the part that destroyed them. The part that destroyed them arrived 6 months later in a courthouse hallway, carrying a sealed envelope and one photograph. A photograph nobody in my family knew existed. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the place where the people who were taken for granted finally stop volunteering for the job. If you've ever been the responsible one, the dependable one, the person everybody calls when something breaks, this story is for you. And if you've ever wondered what happens when the family ATM finally checks its own balance, stay with me, because this one starts at gate C-17. My daughter Emma was sitting beside me eating pretzels when the airline agent frowned at her screen. At first, it looked like a routine delay. Then she frowned again. Then she picked up the phone. 5 minutes later, a TSA supervisor appeared. 10 minutes later, we were in a small office with gray walls and fluorescent lights. The supervisor was kind, too kind. People get kind when they're about to tell you something bad. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "this passport was canceled yesterday." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes reality arrives wearing such a ridiculous costume, your brain rejects it. "What do you mean, canceled?" He turned the monitor toward me. A report had been filed. Lost passport, replacement requested, approved yesterday morning. I stared at the screen. Emma's passport had never left my safe. Nobody could have reported it missing. Nobody except someone who had access to the information. Someone who knew her social security number. Someone who knew her birth certificate details. Someone who had copies of everything. My mother. The realization landed so fast it felt physical, like missing a stair in the dark. The TSA supervisor kept talking. I barely heard him. Something about identity verification, replacement processing, travel restrictions. I wasn't listening anymore. Because suddenly I remembered a phone call from 2 weeks earlier. My mother asking strange questions. "When exactly are you leaving? Which airline? What day? What time?" At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now I understood she had been gathering information. The vacation mattered because my younger sister, Brittany, wanted it, and Brittany always got what Brittany wanted. You need to understand my family, not the version they showed people, the real version. My mother, Diane, believed life was divided into 2 categories, people who needed help and people whose job was providing it. Brittany belonged in the first category, I belonged in the second. That arrangement began when we were children. Brittany forgot homework. I completed it. Brittany wrecked cars. I drove her to work. Brittany maxed credit cards. I loaned money. At first, it looked temporary. Then it became permanent. Then it became my identity. The dependable daughter, the fixer, the one who always landed on her feet. Funny how people admire your strength most when they're standing on your shoulders. By 38, I was a senior project manager for a healthcare software company. I made good money, not flashy money, responsible money, the kind built from budgets and planning and saying no to things. My husband Mark owned a small electrical contracting business. Together, we had done well, not because we were lucky, because we were boring. We saved, we invested, we avoided debt, we lived in a house we could comfortably afford. The result was simple. When emergencies happened, we had solutions, and somehow every emergency in my family eventually became my responsibility. For 11 years, I told myself it was temporary. For 11 years, I was wrong. The TSA supervisor finally left. Emma sat beside me, swinging her feet. "Are we still going to Disney?" she asked. Children have a gift for asking the exact question that hurts most. I looked at her, at the little Minnie Mouse shirt she'd picked for the trip, at the excitement she'd carried for months, and I realized something. My mother hadn't canceled a vacation. She'd stolen a memory that belonged to my daughter. And suddenly, I wasn't angry. I was done. There's a difference. Anger wants a fight. Done wants a conclusion. I pulled out my phone, not to call my mother, not yet. First, I solved the problem, because that's what people like me do. We solve problems before we process feelings. I booked a hotel near the airport, rescheduled the trip, rearranged travel dates. Within 30 minutes, everything was handled, except the reason it happened. That evening, after Emma was asleep in the hotel room, I opened my banking app. Not because of the passport, because the passport had finally forced me to ask a question I'd been avoiding for years. How much had my family actually cost me? Not emotionally.
Financially. The real number. The number nobody ever says out loud. I started scrolling. Transfers. Checks. Loans. Emergency assistance. Credit card payments. Rent support. Medical bills. Car repairs. Legal fees. School tuition. I kept scrolling. And scrolling. And scrolling. Eventually, I exported the records. All of them. 11 years. Then I built a spreadsheet. Because when I'm overwhelmed, I organize. When I'm hurt, I calculate. Numbers are easier than feelings. Numbers don't gaslight you. Numbers don't rewrite history. Numbers just sit there being true. The total appeared at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I stared at it for almost 5 minutes. $612,843. I checked it twice, then 3 times. Then I leaned back in the hotel chair. $612,000, more than $500,000. Gone. Not stolen. Given. That's what made it worse. I had handed it over willingly, one emergency at a time, one crisis at a time, one family obligation at a time, until 11 years had disappeared. The biggest category wasn't medical bills. It wasn't housing. It wasn't my mother's expenses. It was Brittany, my sister, the family favorite, the family project, the family investment, the woman everyone protected from consequences. I created a separate column, then another, then another. Patterns started emerging, the same way mold appears when you finally turn on the light. And what I found made the passport look small, very small. Because Brittany hadn't just been receiving money, she had been receiving something else, something far more valuable: protection. The financial records showed a trail that led somewhere I never expected, somewhere my mother had spent 15 years making sure nobody looked. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I sat in that hotel room until almost 2 in the morning tracing transactions, dates, property records, and old family loans. Every answer created 3 new questions. By the time I finally closed the laptop, I knew 2 things. First, the passport cancellation was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. Second, someone besides me already knew. Someone had been waiting for me to notice. Because buried inside one old transaction was a note attached to a wire transfer from 7 years earlier. Just 3 words: "Ask Grandpa Robert." I stared at the screen, then looked at the time: 2:14 a.m. I almost called him anyway. Instead, I sent a text. Just 4 words. I finally looked. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting years for that message. Then his reply arrived. "About time, sweetheart." And for the first time since the airport, I felt something shift, because suddenly I wasn't the only person who knew the story was bigger than everyone claimed. And according to my grandfather, I had only uncovered the first layer.
Sunday arrived cold and gray, the kind of Colorado morning where the sky hangs low and heavy, like it's waiting for something. Daniel parked across from my mother's house and killed the engine. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nora slept peacefully in her car seat. My ribs still ached every time I breathed too deeply, and in my purse sat a single envelope. Not a folder, not a stack of evidence, just one envelope, because everything that needed proving had already been proven. Today wasn't about evidence. Today was about consequences. Daniel looked at me. "You sure?" I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. Then we got out. The house was already full. Cars lined both sides of the street. My mother hadn't invited family, she'd invited an audience. Exactly what I expected. Inside were my parents, Megan, Aunt Carol, 3 cousins, 2 neighbors, even people I hadn't seen in years. The room went quiet when I walked in carrying Nora. Every eye landed on the cast, the bruises, the baby. For a split second, guilt flashed across a few faces. Then my mother smiled, that same smile she'd used my entire life, the smile that said she was about to perform. "There's my granddaughter." She reached for Nora. I stepped sideways, not rudely, just enough. The smile twitched. Only for a moment, then she recovered. "Everyone sit down," she announced. "We need to clear up some misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. The woman could set a house on fire and call it a misunderstanding. Coffee was poured, chairs scraped, people settled. My mother stood in front of the fireplace like a politician giving a speech. "I'm heartbroken," she began, her voice already shaking. "I don't know what's happened to Paige." Aunt Carol looked uncomfortable. Good, she should. "Your father and I sacrificed everything for our children." There it was, the opening act. Now, because of one accident, she's punishing us. One accident. As if getting hit by a truck was a parking ticket. As if abandoning my newborn daughter was a scheduling conflict. I remained silent. My mother kept going and going and going. 20 minutes of revisionist history. 20 minutes where she somehow became the victim. When she finally paused for breath, she looked at me. "Would you like to say something?" I smiled. "Actually, yes." The room froze. Because I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. And that scared her. I placed the envelope on the coffee table. My mother frowned. "What is that?" "A gift." The room looked confused. Even Daniel raised an eyebrow. I slid the envelope toward her. She opened it, pulled out a single sheet, and the color drained from her face. Immediately, the room noticed. Aunt Carol leaned forward. "What is it?" My mother folded the paper. Too fast, too late. I already knew what was happening. Because the paper wasn't for her. The paper was for everyone else. "Go ahead," I said. "Read it." She didn't, so I did. I began calmly. "It says, property ownership transfer completed." The room went silent. My mother looked sick, because she knew exactly what property. The cabin. I need to explain something. 3 days after my hospital stay, Grandpa Harold called, and he told me something my grandmother had done before she died, something nobody knew, including my mother. Years earlier, Grandma Ruth had purchased a small lake cabin outside Estes Park. Nothing extravagant, just a beautiful place she'd loved. She never told anyone, not even Linda, not officially. The title remained hidden inside a trust, and 2 months before she died, she changed the beneficiary to me, not my mother. Me. Harold finalized the paperwork after the funeral. The transfer completed the previous week. The same week my mother abandoned me. The same week the money stopped. The same week everything changed. "That cabin belongs to Paige?" Aunt Carol asked. Harold nodded. "It always did." My mother's face twisted. "That's not fair." Harold laughed. Actually laughed. The entire room stared, because nobody had heard him laugh in years. "Fair?" Harold said. "Linda, do you really want to discuss fair?" That shut her up, for about 10 seconds.
Then came the explosion. The real one. Not tears, not guilt. Rage. Pure rage. "I was her daughter!" my mother shouted. "I deserved that property!" Harold leaned on his cane. "No." The room became silent again. "No," he repeated. "You believed you deserved everything." The words landed hard, hard enough that nobody moved, not even Megan. Then Harold did something unexpected. He pulled another document from his jacket. Not legal paperwork, a letter. Yellowed, folded, old. My grandmother's handwriting covered both sides. Harold handed it to me. "Read it." My hands trembled, for the first time all day. I unfolded it and began. "Paige, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if I know this family, you're probably carrying more than you should." The room listened. Nobody interrupted. Not even my mother. "I watched you become the person everyone depended on. I also watched them mistake your kindness for an unlimited resource. Those are not the same thing. One is love, the other is consumption." I had to stop for a second, because my throat tightened. "You remind me of myself, and that worries me, because strong women often become bridges. Everyone crosses them. Nobody asks how much weight they're carrying." The room was dead silent. Not even Megan looked shaken. "So I'm leaving you something nobody left me. Permission. Permission to put the load down. Permission to stop rescuing people from consequences. Permission to choose your own family." I swallowed, then read the final line. "If the day ever comes when they force you to choose between guilt and peace, choose peace. Love, Grandma Ruth." Nobody spoke for a long time, because there wasn't anything left to say. The truth had already entered the room. Then something happened I never expected. Megan started crying. Real crying. Not dramatic crying. Not performative crying. The ugly kind. The honest kind. She looked at me. Not our mother. Me. "When did you start paying for me?" Her voice cracked. I answered honestly. "When you were 20. She covered her mouth. "Oh my God." I nodded. "You didn't know?" "No." She looked devastated, because for the first time she understood. Every trip, every launch, every photographer, every bailout hadn't come from Mom. It had come from her sister. Then she turned toward Linda. "Why didn't you tell me?" My mother didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer, only bad ones, and she'd finally run out. The next 30 minutes changed everything. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Nobody stormed out, nobody flipped tables. Reality is quieter than that. Reality sounds like people finally seeing something they've ignored for years, one uncomfortable truth at a time. By the end of the afternoon, Aunt Carol apologized. Twice. One cousin admitted he'd always wondered how my parents afforded their lifestyle. Another admitted he'd loaned Mom money years earlier and never gotten it back. Stories started surfacing. Patterns emerged. And suddenly, I wasn't the problem. I was simply the first person who stopped pretending. My mother sat alone on the couch. Nobody was listening anymore. For the first time in her life, nobody was buying the performance, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with that. When we finally stood to leave, she tried one last time. Her voice was smaller now, almost fragile. "Paige?" I stopped. She looked at Nora, then at me, and asked the question she should have asked months ago. "Can we fix this?" The old version of me would have said yes, immediately, without conditions, without boundaries, without thought. The old version would have paid another 9 years, maybe 20. The old version would have sacrificed herself to keep everyone comfortable. But that woman was gone. The truck had killed her, or maybe the hospital bed had. Either way, she wasn't coming back. So I answered honestly. "The damage can heal." My mother looked hopeful. Then I continued. "But trust has to be rebuilt." The hope faded, because rebuilding trust requires work, and work was never her favorite thing. We left, quietly. No speeches, no drama, no victory lap. Just Daniel, me, Nora, and Grandpa Harold, walking toward the car. Halfway down the driveway, Harold stopped. He looked back at the house, then at me, and asked, "You know what finally broke her?" I shook my head. He smiled. "The money mattered." He tapped the letter in my hand. "But losing control mattered more." Then he got into his truck and drove away. That was 3 years ago. Here's what happened afterwards. The cabin became our family retreat. Every summer, Nora spends 2 weeks there catching frogs and collecting rocks. My mother has never been invited. Not out of revenge, out of boundaries. Those are different things. Megan got a real job, an actual career. The first year was rough. The second got better. Now we talk once a month. Not because we're close, because we're trying. And trying is enough. My father still calls occasionally, mostly from parking lots, still avoiding conflict, still trapped in habits older than I am. But I answer, because forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I forgave him. I just stopped carrying him. As for Mom, she still tells stories, just not about me, because nobody listens anymore. The audience finally learned the script, and once people know the trick, the magic disappears. Last month, Nora asked why Grandpa Harold always keeps Grandma Ruth's letter framed in his living room. So I read it to her, every word. She listened carefully, then asked, "Was Grandma brave?" I smiled. Very. She thought for a moment, then asked another question that made me laugh. "Was Mommy brave too?" I looked at my daughter, the little girl whose first crisis revealed every truth hidden in my family, and I finally answered something I'd never been able to say before. Yes. I said it softly, and I meant it. Mommy was brave too. Because sometimes bravery isn't fighting. Sometimes it isn't revenge. Sometimes it isn't even winning. Sometimes bravery is 4 taps on a banking app. 1 closed account, 1 boundary, 1 decision to stop being everyone's emergency fund and start being your own future instead. The account wasn't just closed, it stayed closed. And that's what changed everything.